Hi, everybody, and welcome to another PIE Crowdcast. I'm Rick Turoczy, co-founder and general manager of PIE, and this will be another awkward individual Q&A session with me. Hi. It's a lot easier when I've got somebody else here to talk to, but I'm hoping folks will be able to submit questions and get those questions answered. I might have answers, I might not, I don't know. We'll see how it goes. This could take an hour, it could take 5 minutes. Oh, hey, Dylan, thanks for coming. Hello, Stephen, thanks for showing up. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. If this is your first time on Crowdcast, there's chat over there, and you're welcome to chat with one another. I'll try and pay attention to it as best I can. But given that this is a Q&A, the most important part is the ask a question button, which is down, maybe over there for you. It's right there for me. If you have questions about the Portland startup community, venture capital, accelerators, Portland in general, feel free to post those there, and I will work on getting those answered for you. The other nice feature about that for folks is even if you don't have a question, you can head over there, see what other questions people have asked, and upvote the questions that you like most. And that way, we can kind of focus the conversation on the things that are most important to you. I haven't had any tacos yet, Martin. I'll take care of that one real quick. No tacos yet, but tonight we're working on the carnitas right now. And speaking of things like tacos and that sort of stuff, we give a shout out to Nat's, Reverend Nat's Hard Cider, who is our sponsor, kind of accidentally. Nat's just kind enough to do it for us. So thank you, Reverend Nat. And please, if you are in the need of cider, feel free to hit them up. They do delivery for folks if they need it. I don't know. I think the Moon Mandarin could go well with tacos, Nat. I mean, you're the expert, but I'm thinking could be okay. We also have Saint Citron sitting around, so we might do that one as well. So give people a few more minutes to I may just pay attention to the chat the whole time because it's far more entertaining than me. Give you a few more minutes to ask questions down there. For folks who I haven't had the chance to meet, just a little background on me. I have worked in, on, and around the Portland startup community for 25 years now. I worked in startups for about the first 12 years in roles of product marketing, marketing communications. During the dot-com days, I built slide decks all day for CEOs and that kind of thing. And after doing that for about 12 years, I thought I'd learned enough to do my own startup, and I was wrong. So I tried to do a couple startups of my own, didn't really work out, discovered I wasn't really a founder, but that I really appreciated the creativity and just drive of founders and wanted to figure out some way to support them. And I had been spending a lot of time in the open source community here in Portland, which was at the time very vibrant. It's kind of not as big as it used to be, but at that time, open source, and if you're not familiar with open source, there's like proprietary software, which is we're going to keep everything secret and charge you for access to our software, and open source software, which is we're really driven to make the best product possible. So we're going to invite everybody in to contribute to that product and help us build it, and then people are free to use it. Portland was really big in the open source community, and I was spending a lot of time in that community. Discovered that I wasn't talented enough as a developer or coder to really contribute to that community. But what I decided to do was kind of open source my marketing communications and started just writing about what I saw people building here in town and events that people were throwing and that kind of thing. And that was Silicon Florist was the name of that blog. That started 12, 13 years ago almost. And because of that blog, about 10 years ago, I got the opportunity to start PIE. And PIE, at its very most basic, is an ongoing experiment to figure out how more established organizations like corporations or government entities or educational institutions can more effectively collaborate with the Portland startup community. And there are currently 3 flavors of PIE. One is software as a service. One is manufactured hardware, so a physical technical object. And then our third one, in partnership with Built Oregon, is a consumer products accelerator, so focused on more traditional consumer products like food and beverage, ciders, apparel, those kind of things. So, all right, so we've got, hopefully that's some context for you. If you have any other questions about my background, you're more than welcome to post those. That's an open topic as well. But it looks like we've already got about 8 questions. So even if you don't have a question, jump in there, upvote the ones you like so that we can focus on the things you're interested in. And if you have a question, make sure and get it posted in there. So let's start. I know this was the first one submitted, and I thought it was a really good question and one that I get quite often. So I thought I'd start with that one. I have an idea for a SaaS product, and in the lingo, SaaS is software as a service. So generally, something on the web or mobile that you are charged kind of incrementally for, usually some kind of subscription model for that. So I have an idea for a SaaS product, but I have no idea how to get team members on board without a business plan or funding. But I need a team to work out a business plan and get funding. I don't know what to do. How do you take an idea and start to get the ball rolling? What are the infancy steps? So this is a classic place where a lot of founders get stuck. It's you have a vision for where you want to go and what you want the company to be. You understand how the world is a better place once your product actually exists, but it's really hard to figure out what that first step is. And so at this point in time, what I always encourage founders to do when they're kind of stuck at this point is to think about things they can do that don't require them to build any technology right now or any production or any of that kind of stuff. So think about ways that you can effectively attract and engage with the community or market you're seeking, but that doesn't require a product to exist or a production facility or code or any of that kind of stuff. So use things that have already been developed. So what do I mean by that? I know a ton of SaaS companies that started out as a successful newsletter. You don't need to build anything to get people signed up for a newsletter. You can pretty much use an out-of-the-box solution, start attracting your market, start creating content, and start that conversation with your market. So something like that, or a Google group, or a Slack instance, or a Twitter account, or an Instagram account. Like, think of something that you enjoy doing that helps you communicate to the market the way you enjoy communicating, and that is somewhere where your market exists, and just start there, because that's a really good way to demonstrate traction. If I'm an accelerator or investor and you demonstrate to me that you've been able to, create a newsletter that has 10,000 subscribers over a very short period of time, then I believe that you understand the market and you understand the offering that could be beneficial to that market. So that's traction to me. If you develop a following on Instagram or YouTube or something like that, that is demonstrating traction. And not only does that demonstrate traction for the potential of funding, but there's a very high likelihood that those other people that you want or need to be participants in your business will also be attracted to that entity you've created or that account that you've created. So I can think of any number of pie companies that have done very well on YouTube or Instagram or those kind of things, and folks have then approached them saying, how can I help you with your business, or how can I contribute? I think specifically of Celia Salazar of Tono Latino, who was on probably a few weeks back now, but still pretty recent in the podcast queue. She did a really good job at that, like building the Tono Latino following. Just hit 10,000 Instagram followers yesterday, and people would reach out to her and say, like what you're doing, how can I participate? How can I be part of the team? So do something that you can do without needing a product. Obviously, you're eventually going to want to build the product, but most important is having the community or the market that's ready to adopt that product. So I hope that answered that, Rachel. If it didn't, please make sure and ask additional questions so I can get those answered. Oh, this is a great one. Good question, Alex. I really appreciate this one. Alex asks, what does a founder mean to you? And so we've gotten into this conversation a couple times. I always claim that I'm not a founder, and some people push back on that. And my take on it, and it may be splitting hairs, but I think there's a difference between being entrepreneurial or being an entrepreneur and being a startup founder. I think startup founders kind of bandied about a lot these days, and it's kind of the popular way of describing people who are starting a business, and it has some cachet to it. But for me, then what's a startup? That should go in questions, Stephen, and we'll let the siren go by. You know better than that. Put that in the question thing. So a founder is someone who, a really good founder has a unique quality to balance, again, this vision I was describing of, like, I call it like entrepreneurial schizophrenia. Like, I don't have a better term for it. I need to come up with a better term for it. But a founder has both the vision for how the world is going to be this amazing place once their product is developed and once their vision is realized, and yet the ability to focus on the very tactical, what do I need to get done within the next hour or within the next day or week? So they have this really good ability to balance between strategic and tactical. And not only that, they have the ability to inspire others to balance that as well. So that's one important quality of a founder. I think the ability to assimilate feedback and make decisions effectively based on your vision for the product is another important thing for the founder. And generally in the world I live in, be it software as a service or hardware-based technology or even consumer products, that founder has to be driven to build a business. This isn't about creating a product. This isn't about attracting a community. A founder truly wants to build a business, even if it means that they have to kill the product that inspired them to start the business in the first place. So being a founder is about building a business. And in most of the work I do, being a founder is about building a business that scales rapidly and is super efficient with capital. So that's kind of my take on a founder and why I don't kind of qualify myself as a founder, because I don't really have that drive to like build PIE into a massive scaling organization. I'm not so enamored of the business of PIE. Like, I like the work of PIE. And I know Stephen's in chat. Sorry, chat's over there. I keep forgetting. Stephen's in chat, and Stephen has this great phrase that he always uses about people who work in the business rather than working on the business. Founders work on the business and have an understanding of how to do that. I tend to work in the business, and that's where I enjoy doing things. So I'm not a founder, but I align very well with founders, and I partner very well with those people who have that strategic vision as being their tactical support. So I can be a co-founder. I'm just really bad as a singular kind of founder. So that's my kind of thing there. And I think Nat Cider is being delivered right now as we speak, because, you know, it's another opportunity to promote Reverend Nat's hard cider, our sponsor since day one. Let's get to the next question, Reverend Nats. This one comes from Lauren. Lauren asks, which community builders are inspiring you the most right now in Portland and beyond? Countless people strive to serve and connect the way that I do. I don't know that most people do this better than I do. I'm wondering who you look up to in that same way. Oh, and we have this special new Shoot the Glass, Schieß den Fenster from Die Hard Reverend Nat. So check out Reverend Nat. Check out that one in the bottle too. And I will actually click the start answering button now since we're done with the delivery and all that kind of thing. So I think in terms of community builders, ecosystem builders, I'm really lucky that because I've been doing this for so long, I get to chat with a bunch of people in different communities who are doing this kind of work. And, you know, locally, I've always got a bunch of back channel conversations going with, again, Stephen Green, I mentioned, Mitch Doherty, my co-founder at Built Oregon, Juan Barraza from Portland State. You know, Mata has moved away, but Mata Zapata and I, Astrid Schultz, like conversations like that going with a bunch of folks locally that always inspire me and always kind of keep me aligned on what I'm doing. And honestly always call me on stuff when I'm getting out of line or not doing the work I should be doing. So I'm super appreciative of those folks who had the ability to do that. I think, you know, there's any number of folks across the country. One that I'll mention in particular is Annika Horn, who runs a project called Social Venturers. And Annika is kind of doing the meta level of ecosystem building where she's ecosystem building for ecosystem builders. So she's doing a lot of interviews and like capturing stories and thoughts from people who are in these roles across the country and around the world. I've been really impressed with what's going on in Germany right now with specifically in Berlin with a lot of community, there are several community managers there and accelerator managers who are doing some really interesting work that I think could potentially inform some of the stuff we're doing around Portland. Great community builder, ecosystem builder, Omaha, Nebraska, Jeff Slabotsky, who was out of that. I mean, he was always kind of a community guy, but way back when I started Silicon Florist, he had started a publication called Silicon Prairie, which covered the kind of Midwest startup community. And so we would compare notes. And he and Dusty created this great event called Big Omaha that was basically the kind of heir apparent to South by Southwest activity and inspired me a lot on the work that I did with what was originally PDX Conf, but became TechFest Northwest. So that was super inspirational. And Jeff kind of stepped away from that work for a while, but I'm happy to report that he's coming back to that in a big way. And I look forward to not only watching his return to this work, but learning from him, because he is phenomenal at building those connections and making those things happen. So hopefully that answers your question, Lauren. I kind of threw out a lot of names there. Maybe I'll come back later and comment with links so that people can find those folks, because I'm super lucky to get the chance to chat with them all the time. And there's also an organization called Startup Champions Network that kind of aggregates folks like me and helps them kind of compare notes with folks across the country and around the world. So that's another great resource if you're interested in that kind of work. Okay. Thank you for the Berlin stuff, Martin. Yeah, Berlin's amazing. Like there's a Zebras Unite group there that's doing some amazing stuff. There's this concept called Mittelstand in Germany, which is basically like an older company that has been based on being profitable and doing good. So kind of like a B Corp or Zebra company. They've just been around for, like 200 years because it's Germany. And so that thing is happening is pretty amazing. And then there's some really good accelerators over there that are focused on mentorship and helping people. And I just like I like the possible collaboration between these kind of old established companies and the startup community in Germany. And fun fact, I grew up in Germany, so that's probably part of it. But like, I think it's really worth watching. Try and read that post that Martin dropped into the chat, and kind of keep tabs on what's happening in Germany, because I sincerely think that could be a model that many of us could emulate, no matter where we are in the United States or around the world. So really like them. Okay. This one is from Steven. My voice is already starting to go. It's only 20 minutes in. I don't know that we'll even make it an hour before I lose my voice. This is why I get other people to talk on a regular basis. No, I'm not bringing Cami on. She's moderating the chat. I have her doing it. She's on. She's just not on. But we could go. I mean, we could go back. Oh, Kimberly's here. We used to do that. Who knows? We may need to reboot that thing. Okay. Questions. Try the hard cider hot. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I'd like tea. Like that's a great idea, Mike. I should probably try that. What does your crystal ball tell you will happen to the DEI work, so diversity, equity, inclusion work, that has been trying to get traction in the region over the last few years? So I've had a lot of conversations about this recently, and if you tuned in to the Crowdcast, it's popped up a couple times. Specifically, if you go back and watch Kate Ertman's episode or Kristen Gallagher's episode, I know we got into it there. I think my greatest concern for the DEI work in our community, or quite frankly in any community, is that that work is regarded as a nice to have, and that it's easy to do when times are up, but it's really easy to cut when push comes to shove. And so that is my concern, that people don't see it as a critical business activity. I have been quite vocal about the Portland startup community, building homogenous companies, and that tends to be one of the things that holds us back from building big companies. Because if you are only building a company of people who look like you, share your own experience, and have a similar take on the world, your company can only get so big, and it can only be so successful. You can't bring in views or recognize opportunities that exist because you all only see the same thing. So Portland gets beat up a lot about how companies never grow terribly large here, how like a 500, 600 person company in Portland is huge. And I am a firm believer that the diversity of organizations is one of the primary things that causes that to happen. I think there's another dynamic at play. I think it's a perfect storm. I think one is largely homogenous. If you're watching from somewhere else or new to Portland, Portland is the whitest city in America. And so companies here tend to be built in a very homogenous way. I think that's one of the issues. I think the other issue is, it's the negative side of a very positive Portland culture, which is this desire to build the best product possible, this culture of craft, and like focusing on a single thing and doing it so exceptionally well that that no one else can build a comparable product because of what you bring to it. So I think that's why we have food cart culture. I think that's why we have the amazing coffee shops and brew pubs and distilleries and all these permutations or kind of recreating the wheel with a slight difference that has made Portland so amazing. I think that's the other aspect of what causes us to kind of grow small companies here is we just want to focus on that one thing, and we don't think about broader solutions. We're not thinking about the restaurant chain. We're not thinking about the broad reaching apparel brand. We just want to build that one thing exceptionally well. And I don't want to lose that about Portland. So I think the secret to breaking through that ceiling is the diversity of opinions and people and experiences, and that will allow us to build much more successful, sustainable, resilient companies that are able to identify opportunities more effectively than homogenous companies. And I think that's probably the best way to put it. Andy made a great point in chat. Maker culture is not factory culture. Like, we would rather produce the best possible thing, very few of the best possible thing, and charge a premium for each of those things rather than make millions and millions of things and charge a kind of cost effective price for those. And that's not a judgment. That's, I think, part of what makes Portland magic. But it's also one of the things that can hold us back from time to time. So we just need to figure that out. Oh, Stephen. Okay, so the Oregon Trail analogy, which Stephen asked for, which I love to use. Sometimes I think I overplay it. So, but because you asked, I will do it. So, forgetting manifest destiny and all the crappy, shitty things that the Oregon Trail did to our Native communities and other people, looking at it from an analogy is, as folks were coming down the Oregon Trail, they hit a fork in the road, and one way was to go to San Francisco Bay Area, go to the gold rush, get rich quick. The other way was to come to Oregon, homestead, create a farm, settle down, make things happen. And I'm a firm believer, and if I ever have time to go back for a sociology degree or something along those lines, that those cultures that founded those communities remain pretty consistent even to today, where the Bay Area, and again, not a judgment, but the Bay Area is very financially driven. Time and time again, don't die of dysentery, Stephen. Time and time again, the Bay Area, San Francisco area has been driven by financial motivations and the opportunity to generate wealth in ways that are faster and more compelling than the kind of existing world. And time again, Oregon has kind of kept going with the slow and steady culture of craft, build a great thing, build something meaningful, and be driven by the emotional reward more than the financial reward. And I think that remains part of both of our cultures. And I think it's only reinforcing because people now self-select, right? Like, if you're very financially driven and you move to Portland, it's highly likely you're going to move down to the Bay Area. Or if you're down in the Bay Area and you are driven more by kind of your emotional, your emotional well-being and the product that you're building, Portland might be a place that you gravitate toward. So I just always think those cultures are super interesting. Oh, wait. Yeah, Dylan thinks I need to take a shot of cider, right? I'm glad it's just cider, even though it's the Mandarin, which is a little more heady than the others. You're welcome, Dylan. Okay, get those questions submitted, whichever side they're on, and jump in there to upvote questions too. There's some that don't have any votes who are feeling bad and they would like some votes, so jump in there as well. That would be appreciated. Just because I just answered one of Stephen's, I'm going to answer another one and then come back to Stephen's. Okay, this is a question from Annie. Annie, thanks for sending in a question. Appreciate it. How can more Portland investors support true startups with their money versus established companies? I don't know that Portland investors can do that. And the reason I say that, and again, not a judgment, they made the money or got the money from another limited partner and have obligations to do something with that money. I think a lot of, as we talked about those kind of smaller companies or companies that don't grow as rapidly, I think a lot of the issue with early stage capital in Portland is some of our earlier stage investors or investors in general are just traditionally more risk averse, mostly because it took them a long time to make that money, and they put a lot of work into generating that wealth or raising that capital if they're managing a fund, and they've raised that capital from individuals who may be a little more risk averse and took longer for them to make that money. So I think there are a lot of cultural dynamics there that I don't think are necessarily wrong. It's just that they are comfortable investing in certain things, and until we have more early stage capital flowing into the community, that's not ever going to change. It's kind of this vicious cycle right now where there's no early stage capital or little early stage capital unless you have significant traction. So therefore it takes you longer to build your business, which means that once you've kind of gone through that grind and are kind of through building that business or taking money off the table or whatever, that's taking you a lot longer than most people. And then you become risk averse with that capital. So I think some risk tolerant capital being kind of injected into the community could be really beneficial. I don't know that that's going to come locally. That might be a problem that we still need to solve from outside of Portland and just kind of stoke that activity. I think the other important thing to, I would be lying if I didn't say this, is 99.9% of companies who think they need to raise capital have no business raising capital. It's a VC funding is designed for a very rare company. And while it's become part of a popular culture with the Shark Tankification of the building of companies, the true matter is that a lot of companies just aren't venture fundable companies. And Stephen, I always can trust Stephen to come in with the metrics. So 0.4% of US companies raise equity-based financing. So 0.4%, less than 1%. And there are all kinds of dynamics at play there. But the fact of the matter is we've been brainwashed into thinking that raising venture capital is the only way to build a company, and that is absolutely incorrect. That is actually probably for obviously the vast majority of companies should be doing everything but trying to raise venture capital. And so again, another kind of perfect storm situation of dealing with perceptions about what we should be doing and the reality of how businesses are actually built. And I think this is one of those situations where our proximity to the Bay Area and to Seattle, for some extent, does us a disservice, where we have kind of fallen into that trap of thinking that because that's the way they do it, that's the way we should do it. And there's no quick fix there. And to Annie's point, even if you are an equity financeable company, even if you are well positioned to be efficient with capital and grow rapidly, that's still really difficult to raise capital here in Portland. You need traction, and you need customers, and you need you need a product. There's not concept funding here, and that's just kind of what we're dealing with. So the most efficient way to deal with that situation is to look for capital elsewhere. And I know that a lot of founders are forced into that kind of situation. Okay. Oh, this isn't. Stuff's floating around. I'm going to close this and open it back up. Thank you, everyone, for the questions. These are awesome, and are keeping me kind of like, oh, and I got some tea. Yay. Thanks, because my voice is about to melt. Yeah, Andy, I think that was kind of what I was trying to get at, was like, if you can generate wealth in 3 to 5 years, you're a lot more willing to sprinkle that wealth around, and a lot more confident that you have the ability to do that 4 or 5 more times in your lifetime. Whereas if it's taken you 15 to 20 years to generate wealth, you're not so sure you have another one of those in you. And so you're a little more reticent to kind of sprinkle that capital around. Okay. Okay, let's get to Stevens. What's a startup by your definition? Yeah, this is one of the, again, like so much of the work I do is a bunch of just splitting hairs. Like, is it an incubator? Is it an accelerator? Is it a founder? Or is it a hobby? By my definition, a startup is a company that, if managed effectively, I'm not going to say correctly, but if managed effectively, has the potential to scale rapidly and be efficient with capital. And not only that does it have that potential, but that is the desire driving the founding team. That their goal is to build a really, really big company really, really quickly. Not to build a profitable company, not to build even a company that's generating meaningful revenue, but to build a big company very, very rapidly. And his follow-on is Salt and Straw a startup? I haven't seen it. So personal experience, and this is not qualifying Salt and Straw one way or the other. But from my perspective, I haven't seen a lot of rapid expansion or desire to become a worldwide chain from Salt and Straw. I haven't seen that kind of pursuit. I don't think most restaurants are startups. I think restaurants have a tendency to be very intensive with capital, very low margins, and very hard to scale rapidly. I mean, what was that thing like? Shake Shack is just barely thinking about starting a Portland outlet, or like think of Burgerville or things like that are successful but haven't grown rapidly. In-N-Out's in Salem, though, I think, Andy, or at least Kaiser. But I think there's the tendency these days to want to qualify yourself as a startup simply because it's a kind of popular culture term, and that there's some benefit to being called a startup. Like, I think Salt and Straw is innovative. I don't think innovation alone makes you a startup. If innovation alone made you a startup, then every food cart in Portland would be a startup, or every brew pub in Portland would be a startup, because they are innovative and they are entrepreneurial. But in my mind, that's not really a startup. That's not something that has the potential to scale quickly with a minimal amount of capital. And so that's, in my parlance, how I kind of qualify startups and the types of companies we look to work with. I think there are different kinds of capital too. So a startup to me doesn't have to be one that can necessarily grow just because they can raise VC. A startup could be something that grows because they can raise social capital, or because they can generate buzz, or because they can create traction in a way that is compelling. Like, while I don't think of Salt and Straw as a startup, I think of it as an equity financeable company, but I don't think of it as a startup. I do think of Wildfang as a startup, because Wildfang has developed such a rabid following from a community that truly loves that brand, that while they might not have scaled to a massive number of retail locations or chains, they have built a amazing community of people who believe in them and follow them. And so I think that social capital that that Wildfang was able to generate in a very cost-effective and scalable way, I think in my mind qualifies it as a startup. Or something like Society9, where you may not be seeing this like massive rapid scale, but you're seeing them hone in on a particular segment of a target market that sees their solution as the only reasonable solution to the problem that they personally feel. And tuning into that kind of dynamic, I think, also helps define you as a startup. So hopefully that answers that one. If not, Stephen, you're always welcome to add more or hit me up in Slack or those kind of things. Okay. Next question from, we're 40 minutes into this. From Mackenzie T. See what I did there. What are your tips for building a community of open source contributors on GitHub or other platforms? So I don't have a ton of experience with GitHub. I've contributed to projects. I've run my own GitHub project, but it was only a text-based project. We wrote an open source manual and hosted it on GitHub about how to run a startup accelerator. It's called the PIE Cookbook, and it's hosted out on GitHub so that people can basically use the bug reporting and issue reporting to help us drive the content of that publication. But in terms of tips on those platforms, I think they're the same tips as any other community, and it's really about recognizing the circles of the community and how those different circles interact as a peer group, but also how they interact with one another. I think community is a series of concentric rings. So there's kind of the hub of the community, the gravitational pull, which can be an individual or a group of people. They're the ones really driving the project or the product or the code base, and they're there day to day. They're seen as synonymous with the project or product that they're driving, and people look to them for the strategy of that project. Then the next immediate ring is the folks. Generally, first it's the early adopters, right? They will be people who are rabid about the project, want to participate, want to contribute, and the second you deviate from what they think to be the right path for that project or product, they will get pissed and leave. And so they kind of become, they're almost like a comet that's kind of coming through your orbit, right? Like they'll be super happy about it when the gravitational pull appeals to them, and the second you deviate, they're gone. They're like far flung, finding the next new project, because early adopters are generally pretty much always early adopters. They want to be involved in projects when they're really early. But as it kind of develops its own brand and agency and that sense of being, you will find a tight hub of people around that who are kind of your key contributors. Those are the folks who, even more so than early adopters, those key contributors are the folks who you want to be paying attention to, being kind to, making sure you're listening to what they have to contribute to the product, because they, more so than anyone else, probably understand what you're doing and where you're going with it. Then there will be then people will be in a next ring, which are kind of tangential contributors. They're interested in it, they're monitoring it, but they're not paying attention to it day in and day out. And so that group is challenging because you have to over communicate with that group without frustrating the tighter knit group. So ways you can find to communicate outwardly to those broader reaching groups without frustrating the inner circle with over communication and that kind of thing. That's always a challenge. So that can be things like kind of State of the Union kind of calls to keep people informed, or it can be kind of a targeted email list that only goes to that broader community and doesn't really bug the closer community who you likely have on a Slack instance or on DMs or that kind of thing. And just figuring out the channels you're using to communicate with those communities and keeping everybody informed, because the folks who are kind of tangential contributors aren't paying attention to you as much, and so they need to be reminded that you're there and working, and they need to feel like they're informed on that kind of thing. And then there's the kind of broader just curious or users of the product who are really just monitoring for releases and that kind of thing. And you need to be managing those folks, but that's not nearly as high touch as those other groups. So those folks are generally only looking for, you hold an event once a year, or you have a regular user group. They just want some way that's given to them where they can choose to participate in the community when they want to. They don't want to be forced into participating in the community because it's not that critical to them. They just want to feel like they're part of the broader community. So those are just a few tips from a communications standpoint, Mackenzie. I hope those help. Open source communities are really hard. Like proprietary products are easier to manage than open source, because when you own a proprietary product, you've made the decision to pay for it. And so you feel like you've got this financial obligation to it, where often open source communities are only driven by social capital and emotional engagement. And so they can be much more challenging to manage. But, it's something that I think takes a community management kind of perspective on it. Like, it's definitely a community. It's just recognizing that it's not a homogenous community and communicating with those folks and connecting those folks in the way that works best for them based on where they exist within the community. Okay, from Andy. Is there a place where an unspectacular team but a killer product can get pre-seed funding? Yeah, what VC do you know? Like, there's so many unspectacular products that get funded, and there's so many unspectacular teams with great products that get funded simply because of who they know. And they worked with so-and-so who made some money over here, or their dad happens to know this person over here, or their mom's, at the administrator at the college where they went to. It's all comes down to those connections more than often the quality or the compelling nature of your product. It comes down to that social capital, which can make it even more frustrating. If you have built an amazing product, you realize the brilliance of that product, and as a founder have the vision for what that product can solve, and yet you're banging your head against the wall trying to either get the market to understand that or get investors to understand that. I keep coming back to it time and time again, but so many companies fall into a situation like Milk Run here locally or Work From here locally, where they had such an educational hurdle they were trying to overcome that because of this pandemic, that educational hurdle has been eliminated pretty much overnight. And now people are suddenly like, oh, now I see why we need local food distribution, because the food system is overwhelmed and overtaxed. We should pay attention to that. Or, oh, now I see why I need help working remotely. Or I need to understand how remote work is done more effectively, because we're all remote workers. So that can be another one where you see, great team, kind of mediocre product, or not a spectacular team, but have built an amazing product, but they get stuck not because of the product or the financial capital, but it's the social capital that provides that access. The food distribution company was Milk Run. It's localmilkrun.com. And they're currently only in Portland. They're expanding to Seattle soon. And full disclosure, they went through the PIE program. So they were a company in our 2019 class. So yeah, Andy, I think to put a cap on that, it's really just, who do you know? And who do you know that the product is going to resonate with? And that's far more likely to get you funding than, any spectacular, sorry, Stephen, any spectacular spreadsheets, sorry, but, or business models or revenue or traction or any of that kind of stuff. Like, that's unfortunately how that side of the business works. It's not what you know, it's who you know. Okay. About 10 minutes. We may go longer because we've got like 11 questions left and I want to get to some of these. So I'll try and get through them a little more rapidly, and hopefully my voice is holding up enough that you can hear me talking. Are there any particular players, institutional, educational, etc., that you wish would get more involved in economic development in Portland? That's a question from Scott Smith. That's a great question. Thank you, Stephen. There's a small printed circuit board and micro circuitry kind of company located out in Hillsboro that I really wish was more involved in the startup community. I can count on one hand the number of people I talk to from Intel on an annual basis. They're just not connected in any way, shape, or form. And I think that is something that not only holds the community back, but also potentially holds Intel back as well. So that's one I would love to see them more involved. I think, HP also has a substantial presence in town and in Vancouver. It would be great to see them more involved in the community. From a educational standpoint, there's not really, there's kind of this concept of organizations that should be, and if you've read Startup Communities, they're kind of the leaders and feeders, and so many of these institutions are more in a feeder role where they shouldn't be really driving the conversation, but they should be helping provide the talent and support that the community needs to make those kind of things happen. So it's, like we've got Portland State here, which is doing an ever better job of being a feeder. We have the University of Portland. Scott, you mentioned philanthropy as an add-on to that question. I think Portland's an incredibly philanthropic town, which is amazing. I just think that Portland gravitates more towards philanthropy than entrepreneurship or investment. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I think a lot of people who have generated wealth here would much rather see their wealth going to arts and theater and those kind of things, or hospitals, than proprietary companies. They'd rather see them going to the greater good, and because of that, a lot of those philanthropic organizations tend to be more disconnected. They're playing a role as kind of a fund of fund kind of roles, and what I mean by that is the limited partners who provide capital for a VC, a venture capital fund. So the people who give the venture capital folks the money to work with, that's where you see philanthropic organizations playing the most here in our region. And I think they're doing a good job there. I don't know that they're getting the return that they want to see, and so I think that's the challenge with those folks. Also, things like PGE or larger utilities, I think there's a real opportunity there for kind of innovative smart city kind of activity that could be really compelling. It would be great to see some of those organizations more involved. But it's also, the community is not big enough and compelling enough to attract that engagement. So part of the onus is on us to make it seem like something that's compelling enough to be for an organization of that size to be engaged. Same goes for healthcare. I think, I started my career in digital healthcare, and we have a massive healthcare population here, and there's a real opportunity to get those kind of folks engaged. And there are groups like Otrati, Oregon Bioscience Incubator, that is creating the bridge for those communities to engage more effectively. But I think we have a real opportunity there to really be doing some definitive work and innovative work between the OHSUs and Providence and Kaisers of the world and our local folks here. So hopefully that answers that. I wasn't trying to tap dance around it, but I hopefully provided a decent answer. Okay, this is a quick one. It's almost 6, so I'll keep going through these. If folks want to stick around, thanks, Scott. Thanks for the question. If folks want to stick around, you're more than welcome. If you all start to disappear, I will then disappear. That's how it works. I'm only here if you're here. Okay, how do mentors get engaged with Built? So we'll have Mitch Doherty on the show tomorrow. So Mitch is the founder and lead of Built. I'm really just there supporting him as a co-founder. The easiest way is to really just reach out to Mitch. We are always looking for mentors for that program. We're always looking for people who have experience in consumer products industries. We had, Mitch's kind of guiding vision is Oregon is the Silicon Valley of consumer products. We have major apparel companies here. We have major food and beverage companies here. There's so much expertise and capital that has been generated by consumer products that we should look to activate that knowledge and capital in a way that supports these up and coming companies. And so we are always eager to engage with mentors. And given that PIE is behind the scenes running the accelerator program for Built, I feel perfectly comfortable saying this. The requirement for being a mentor at Built or being a mentor at PIE is just, your only obligation is you agree to have one half-hour Zoom meeting these days, or a half-hour coffee meeting in the future with one of our founders once a year, just to provide your input. And we do the best we can to curate those connections. So it's not like we're randomly setting you up on a speed date with somebody. We're usually only asking our mentors to meet with people if we've identified a problem that mentor can be helpful with, so that it's high value for both the startup and the mentor. So please, it's just Mitch, MITCH, at builtoregon.com. Just drop him an email, tell him I sent you his way, or just show up tomorrow and you can get some more questions answered about Built, Mitch. Despite Oregon's unique dynamics, it appears that the institutional knowledge from startup coaches are all directed towards VC funding. Where would you go if you were looking for guidance on bootstrapping companies? I don't know, can you see this? Come to PIE. We don't care if you're raising VC. In fact, we try and get people to avoid raising venture capital. We are more in the business of helping you figure out whether you're actually a founder. Because it took me so long and it was so painful for me figuring out I wasn't a founder. That's the primary mission of our business, to help you figure out, are you on the right path? Do you want to be a founder? And if so, how we propel you forward more rapidly into that role. And we would much rather have you build a business than build a equity funded company that isn't a good business. So that's a good one. There are other groups, like if you look at the Zebras Unite group in Portland, those are all companies that are really focused on doing well while doing good. You can find them at zebrasunite.com, or they're on Mighty Networks as Zebras Unite. That's another one where it's a great cohort of people who are very much interested in helping one another build companies that are sustainable and resilient. So check that out as well. Trying to think if there's any others off the top of my head. Those are the ones that immediately jump to mind, but please don't think of PIE as something that's focused on just venture funded companies. We were in the past, until we went through enough of that to learn that that wasn't really what was needed here in town. We needed something that focused on companies that were building companies through other means. So that's our focus. And again, our focus with Built as well. Like, we recognize that most consumer products companies are not going to be raising venture capital. They're definitely going to be doing something along the lines of debt or factoring or revenue-based financing to make sure that they're growing. Had a question. Putting together my pitch deck and finding it's challenging to estimate costs so far. Do you know about spreadsheet templates or other resources for estimating startup costs? So this one, actually, the community has just gone off in the comments. So Stephen's going to answer that far better than I can, simply because you use the keyword spreadsheets, which will always set Stephen off, and he will give you all these tips. But I would, Mackenzie, dive back into that question, see if Stephen helped. If not, there are any number of ways of kind of modeling this kind of stuff. But fact of the matter is, you're guessing. I always advise founders that whatever you think you need to spend on marketing, triple it. However long you think it's going to take to generate revenue, double it. Don't be overly optimistic. I'd rather see you being a little pessimistic and having a investor or a customer push you to be more aggressive. I'd lean toward the worst case scenario or the middle ground scenario for what you're planning, because things will never grow as fast as you want them to, and they will always cost way more than you want them to. Kind of think of it like a house remodeling project. Like, it's not going to finish on time. It's going to cost way more money than you want it to. That's kind of what being a startup is like. But in the long run, we're all just guessing. So don't be afraid to put some educated guesses out there, because that's all we're doing anyway. Also, there is Rohan mentioned Business Plan Pro. You might also look at Palo Alto Software, which is out of Oregon. They have a product called Live Plan that can help with some of this modeling and some of those concepts. So that might be something that works. Hey, one I can answer really quickly. Did you upgrade your web camera about a week ago? Yes. Yeah. So I had one on order and it finally showed up. Um, Same ring light, different webcam, and so long as like there aren't a bunch of people streaming, then it comes through pretty clearly. So I got the Logitech 920 C920, I think. It's a 1080p high def. It has a speaker as well, but I use the Blue Yeti mic for the most part, and it it's doing really well. I really like it. If you can find one, where they're hard to come by, but I highly recommend it. And now I should probably look for an affiliate link for Logitech, and probably for Blue. Um, Martin asks, should I bootstrap my startup or go right away for VC funding? Martin, come on, that's just a softball. You should bootstrap your startup, and don't go after VC funding unless it's absolutely the right thing for your company, because um, it it's a really hard relationship to get into with another entity, and put you on a path of, once you start raising VC money, you're always raising VC money. So if you want to have control of your company, if you want to be driving the strategy, if you want to be saying what's done with revenue generated or a capital at your disposal, then you probably want to steer clear of venture capital. If you're building something that's equity financeable and you're comfortable with the relationship where someone else is going to be driving some, if not all, of the activity, then that's where you go for VC funding, because it's a whole different relationship. Alex Mason asks, if you've exhausted your personal network, how can you continue to get feedback on your SaaS product, software as a service product? So Alex, I'm a big fan of you can't do it right now, um, but hopefully in the not too distant future, the kind of sit down in a coffee shop or sit down in a brew pub and be like, hey, would you take a look at this kind of thing? I'm an introvert, so that drives me absolutely batty, but it's a really good way to get genuine feedback from people, especially if you're like, hey, if I buy you a coffee, would you take a look at this and talk to me about it? Any number of the PIE startups have been successful in that regard using that technique, so that's a great one. If there's somewhere in particular that your target market lives and breathes, like if it's the grocery store or professional sports or whatever, like there might be a different location you seek out for that kind of feedback. But I think the biggest problem with your personal network is finding people within your network who are going to give you objective criticism. I think especially in Portland, we talk about this all the time. Like people are just going to be, yeah, that's great, you should totally do that, and I love it, go do it, which is why we have 12,000 food carts and coffee shops and brew pubs and that kind of thing. And that's what part of what makes Portland magic. But people will always be kind to you, and people will always want you to do your best and be motivated to do that. So the sooner you can get outside your personal network, the better. Also, in this day and age, like look for events that are going on near that topic, or if you code in a particular stack, like look for user groups on that topic to provide feedback, or open source projects where people are participating and might provide that feedback. Look for even Reddit or places like that. If there's anywhere people will provide their unvarnished feedback, it's Reddit or YouTube or those kind of things. So don't be afraid to socialize that idea out there as well. That can be a really valuable way of getting outside of your immediate network really quickly. From Casey, and we got about 5 more to go. So if you need to bail, feel free. This will all be recorded. You can come back and get it. From Casey, what support, influence, insight do you feel the Portland startup scene is most lacking, other than just plain old VC funds? I think that that segues right to the previous question. I think very few people are getting the harsh, objective, real feedback they need. Too many people are kind of being led along and getting themselves into trouble because they're either getting ill-informed advice or people who are interested more in being kind than being helpful. And so I think that's where we could up our game a little bit on the startup founder side, kind of the being willing to hear that feedback, because I think it goes both ways. I think part of the reason a lot of people provide feedback in that manner is people aren't willing to receive the feedback that's truly objective and critical. A lot of the work we do at Casey, as you well know, is continuing to hammer on people until we break through that veneer and really get them to start listening to the objective feedback. So I think that's probably what's most lacking is the objective feedback on one side and the resilience or ability to assimilate that feedback effectively on the other side. So I think that would help a ton. I think that would help more than venture capital, quite frankly. Not to say that people have to stop doing things. I mean, you're allowed to have a hobby. You're allowed to do something because you love doing it. Just don't think that because you love this product idea and you think it's compelling and someone kindly told you to pursue it, that it's actually a business opportunity. Like, be realistic about what's a business and what's not. You don't have to stop doing it. You're just probably not going to get paid for it. Thoughts on establishing Portland as a climate tech hub? That question, that's a great question. I think we haven't been in that space, so I'm not informed enough to like even comment on that. But I think when you look at things like some of the stuff that Virtu Labs is doing, like to become a hub of that activity, or like Clean Tech Challenge kind of stuff. Inventor seems to be doing a lot of work in that regard through Portland State and those kind of things. Like, I think there's the potential, but again, I think it needs to come back to who are those anchor institutions who are really going to drive that activity, because the onus can't be on startups to drive that activity. They're too busy trying to build their own business. We need some kind of established folks who, or established organizations or corporations who are going to lift up those startups and lift up that community and help with some of that development. I think the potential is there. Somebody needs to step up and do it. Okay, a couple more. If people are still, thank you for hanging out. There's still 30 of you here. I really appreciate it. I hope this is helpful. What I love about it most is that I'm getting entirely different questions than I got last time, which is amazing. So this is super helpful for me too. Like, this creates a kind of a library of responses that we can kind of reference now. So thank you everyone for these great questions. B2B SaaS, application plus cloud, how far down the traction and revenue path do investors start getting interested? How would the Portland investment community fit in? In Portland, you have to be product in market, significant traction, show a significant upward growth in that traction, and be able to demonstrate how you continue that growth effectively over time. That's just the Portland risk tolerance here. We don't fund concept companies here. That's just not the way capital is put to work. So I think you can look for other ways to demonstrate that traction. That's another way to kind of hack it. So is there a community you've built around it, or an Instagram account that has hundreds of thousands of followers, or something that you can show that is demonstrable traction? Doesn't necessarily even need to be with the product, just needs to be with that target market. That can be a way you can get around that. Or the other way to get around that is to have founded, so find a DeLorean and a flux capacitor, go found a company 10 years ago, make money for those investors you want to invest in you today, and they will throw money at your concept idea because you've generated the belief that you're capable of doing that, and you've made them money before. And that's the other challenge of that kind of financing is, as a serial founder, you are going to have a better time raising capital your third or fourth time around, especially with investors who you've helped them on their IRR and return money to their LPs. They're going to be more focused on investing in you. Just got in here. Does press ever equal traction? No, I think the outcome of press can equal traction. Like if because you're getting press, you're suddenly generating more potential beta users, more newsletter subscribers, more people following you, more paying customers. But press is really an ends to a means to an end. Press is a means of getting to develop that traction, but it's just a stimulant. It's not a demonstration of traction. I have a laundry list of companies that have been on the front page of the New York Times or in Entrepreneur Magazine or in Fast Company who have never developed the traction that they had hoped to develop. So media, press, that kind of thing is not a direct corollary of that kind of thing. That's a great question, Martin. Was Stumptown a startup in taking 17 years to exit to Pete's? I think at some point along the line, Stumptown became a startup. I don't think you have to start as a startup. I think you can become a startup. And I think once they hit that point where they'd established the brand and they were ready to grow it exponentially, I think it went into startup mode. The first startup I worked for had been around for 10 or 12 years before it really became a startup, before it tried to hit that trajectory. So just because it's not a startup today doesn't mean it can't be a startup in the future. Likewise, just because it's a startup today doesn't mean it will always be categorized as a startup. So yeah, I think you can become a startup at any point in your growth. Good one to end on. So we went about 15 minutes over. Thanks for people hanging out. Really appreciate it. When is the next PIE cohort forming? So generally PIE ends and we take a couple months kind of assessing what went well, what didn't work well. Obviously with the pandemic, we've been thrown another curveball, which is the assumption that PIE will need to be at least in part, if not in totality, a virtual program. So how do we deliver services, mentorship, trust in a way that we feel is up to our standard, but within a virtual environment? That's what we're trying to figure out now. We'll probably open applications in the summer at some point with hopes of starting the cohort late summer, early fall. And that will carry through until March or April, May timeframe, somewhere along there. So we have been trying to do demo day in March. And now we've tried this new technique where demo day isn't the end. So you do demo day and then PIE spends another month or two with you, helping you kind of transition into the next phase of your business or helping you get into a different accelerator. Like if you watch the Techstars Anywhere demo day today, Milk Run from PIE and Work from PIE were both in Techstars Anywhere this time around. So can we help you get to that next stage of accelerator? We'll work with you on that. We have another company that's in Techstars Seattle, and I believe their demo day is tomorrow. Or you may be looking at Y Combinator or something else. Like that's another way that we can kind of help you continue to grow as a company. So we'll definitely do a bunch of Q&A sessions like this specifically on PIE to make sure that your questions are answered and that you have all the dates and that kind of stuff. I know Marquita who's the program manager at PIE, had already volunteered to do one of those with folks. So we'll probably get one of those on the docket in the not too distant future. And then there are no gotchas with PIE. Like, we're fully transparent about the application and what we expect and all those kind of things. So we'll make sure you have all the information you need, and would really look forward to seeing what you're working on. Martin, how can we help you? Rick, yeah, thank you. So if you haven't been to the previous Crowdcast, the end of the session, and this is a great way to end it, we always ask the guest, how can we as a community be helpful to you? What could we be doing? So now Martin's turning this around on me, because otherwise I wouldn't answer it. And we've discovered I'm like Ron Burgundy and will read anything in the question, so be forewarned. I think right now, just you're doing it. Like, keep showing up to this stuff. Like, be active in the chat. Like, that's great. Like, seeing the community interact simply because we all wound up here is really nice to see. And those are the things that are most helpful to me. Like, showing up to these kind of things, reaching out to folks. That's a good one. So if there's someone who has mentored you or helped you, invested in your company, has been your boss at some point in time, please reach out to those people. I'm very concerned that those folks are always kind of carrying the weight of what's going on and are always reaching out to others, but they might not get the kind of emotional and mental support that they need. So if you know someone like that, and I know you do, please reach out to them. Wear a mask if you're going outside. Like, wear a mask. Just wear a mask. I almost did this whole thing in a mask, because wear a mask. Just please do that. And finally, I think you can help me by just taking care of yourself, being resilient, hanging in there. This is really hard, and there's a lot more of this left. We were talking about it the other day, and it's like, we don't want to say we're in the middle of this, because we don't even know where middle is. So I've been thinking about it more like a 5-act play or something along those lines. And I know we're not even at Act 1, or maybe barely into Act 2. So just hang in there. Give yourself, Darren Buckner, the founder of Work From, has a really great phrase for this. He says, give yourself some grace. So if you can just give yourself some grace and time, and know that there's no way to hustle your way out of this, I think that would be super beneficial to me too. But please, first and foremost, hang in there, keep coming back, come hang out with us. It's just really great to see you all, and really appreciate you all coming. So hang in there. We're going to sign off for today. Tomorrow is Mitch Doherty, co-founder of Built Oregon and the guy leading the show. So if you have questions about consumer products or our Built Accelerator, that's a great place to be to get those questions answered. If you want some Built swag, we'll probably drop the link for that kind of stuff too. Yeah, if you've got time to show up, we would love to see you. I know Mitch would love to chat with you. And then in terms of taking care of yourself, it's Mental Health Awareness Month. If you didn't know that, you do now. And so we will have Anthony Ware of Founder Mental Wealth on Thursday, who will be coming in, and he is really good at like helping you kind of think through that mental, behavioral, and emotional health. So if you're struggling with that, every founder is, even when we're not in a pandemic. So I know you're struggling with it now. Please show up for that and come hang out with us and get your questions answered about mental health and that kind of thing. All right, folks, really appreciate you coming. Thanks as always to Reverend Nat Sider for sponsoring the show, and for Nat being here. It's great to see everyone, and hang in there. We'll get through this. All right. Wash your hands, wear a mask. Talk to you later.